Good afternoon, everyone. So I've embarked on a bit of a quest to not only help change the culture of care, but to redefine the very essence of what it means to care for our workforce. Because here's what we've heard a lot about. We are confronted with an alarming reality. So 85% of home care agencies are turning away care because you don't have the caregivers in the workforce to support it. Here's the relentless struggle that we see. Owners, operators, recruiters, unable to attract and retain enough caregivers. We see caregivers unable to make ends meet that are forced to leave the profession. And what's worse, we see vulnerable individuals that need care that can't get the care that they need. And it's time for change. And I'm excited to be in this room today because these minds collectively can help drive that change. So I invite you to imagine a brighter future with me, a future where we disrupt the status quo and prioritize the well-being of our caregivers, fostering a thriving, sustainable workforce, a future where compassion and empathy and respect are the pillars of our care ecosystem, and the stories of burnout and workforce shortages become a distant memory. Here's where it starts. It begins with a shift in mindset, a mindset that the well-being of caregivers and those serving those that need care are just as important as the well-being of the people that they're serving. Because here's the thing, in order for us truly to care for one another, we must first take care of those who are dedicating their lives to caring for others. So I'm going to share with you today some trends and some insights that you might find valuable to bring back to your own organizations. I'm going to share some trends from both a provider perspective, and I'm going to share some trends from a workforce perspective. And we're going to end here right before lunch with 4 actionable strategies to accelerate and stabilize your workforce. So first, let's talk about state of providers. We recently ran a small survey with 450 home care agencies, small to medium-sized businesses, to get a pulse on what was happening in their organizations. Here's what they said. So on average, your small business agencies are turning away 510 hours of care on a monthly basis and a median of 100 hours on a monthly basis because they don't have the workforce to support the demand. But it's not just about the number of caregivers that are available. When we asked agencies over the past 6 months, do you feel the industry, the home care industry's client service has gotten better, stayed the same, or gotten worse? 40% of home care agencies said due to the workforce crisis, it's gotten worse. Retaining employees has gotten even more difficult. So 38% said it stayed the same, but that's not good. It was just published that last year, the average turnover in home care was 77%. It's a big number. 53% said it got worse. 76% of agencies said they feel the industry has not yet recovered from COVID-19. Now we're going to layer in some more complex issues of racial bias and ageism that make it even harder to staff. So 79% of home care agencies reported some level of a staffing challenge due to a family requesting hiring a caregiver that looked like them. 83% reported some level of a challenge of families not wanting to work with caregivers that were deemed too young. And it's not just about finding any old caregiver or having enough caregivers, it's about finding the right caregivers, right? And caregivers that have the right qualifications. Here's what's tough. 58% of agencies want a caregiver with a high school GED or diploma, yet 20% of the industry doesn't have one. Then we layer on the challenge of providing consistent care. So 48% of home care agencies reported caregiver call-offs at least 2 times per month or more frequently due to transportation challenges. The same amount said the same exact thing, but for childcare issues. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night. We see experienced caregivers leaving the industry, and that limits our labor pool even more. So 33% of agencies, they really want to hire caregivers that have at least 1 year of experience before putting them in a home of a senior. So that's probably what a lot of you might be feeling from a provider perspective. Next, I want to share a few insights from a workforce perspective. So we ran a really cool study with Bill Dombey and his team over at NAC late last year, analyzing 67,000 direct care workers. So think caregivers, your CNAs, your home health aides, the faces of the individuals that are providing the care in the homes today. Here's what we found. Caregivers are 7 times more likely to live in the poorest income category versus the average US population. 53% are on some form of public assistance. 17% don't have any health insurance. Many of these caregivers are struggling with basic needs like keeping the lights on, putting food on the table, things that many of us in the room take for granted. Our workforce is 63% people of color, primarily female, median age of 47. One of the most startling facts that I saw in the research, caregivers, direct care workers are 3 times more likely to struggle with anxiety and depression over the average US population. So we ask, what drives these individuals to continue working in this field despite all of these challenges? We all know it's not the pay. So here's what's interesting. Working as a caregiver, a CNA, has a negative, depending on your state, $2 to $4 competitive wage index. So what that means is a caregiver with the same or less skills could immediately earn $2 to $4 more per hour. Yet caregivers persist. They're fueled by a passion of people and of caring for people, even while sometimes their needs go unmet. One thing the study unpacked, and I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, there's no single profile of a caregiver. In fact, there were 7 different faces of people that are delivering care today. And I'll walk through each of these in a moment. But regardless of their persona, regardless of their background, and regardless of their why, caregivers are an incredibly special group of people. I say these are folks that are doing God's work. They need to be more visible. Here's the thing, caregivers want a next step. Everyone wants a next step. 70% are interested in pursuing more education, and they want more training. And we talk about solving the workforce crisis, it starts with understanding the people delivering the care. Because at the end of the day, we need to provide the necessary support for their well-being. And here's the business reason. Supported caregivers deliver the best care, they stay longer in their roles, and they provide better quality of service. So that's a lot of data. Now I'm going to talk about what can we do with the data. So I've unpacked here 4 key strategies and areas that I think any organization in this room can focus on to stabilize your workforce. Now we can leave no stone unturned. I've heard a lot of great ideas on stage from other speakers up here this morning. So these aren't all of the ideas, but I picked these 4 because I think they're going to accelerate change either the fastest or in the biggest way. First and foremost, I think most speakers have already talked about this, it's advocacy. So Washington needs to hear, in your local communities, need to hear more voices of caregivers and more voices of what's happening in your own organization. I recently had the privilege of speaking at the NAC Advocacy Day and sitting down with members and also their millennial aides in Washington. And I can tell you firsthand, they don't always know what a caregiver is. Nurses get confused with caregivers. Home health aides get confused with caregivers. They're not the same thing. I said in multiple meetings, I'd say caregiver or home health aide, and they'd say a nurse. And I would shake my head and I would say, no, let me tell you, please let me share about who a caregiver is. Also, There's a sense in Washington that home care profits have never been higher. Why not make a cut? It is important to get stories to Washington. It's also government is the largest funder and also the largest trainer of anyone in the United States. They train more people than anyone else. The government can help create more workers. And right now, home care is in the spotlight. The time has never been more bright to make sure some of those funds that are coming down are trickling down to our caregivers and our home health aides. Second workforce strategy that you can implement tomorrow. This is one of the biggest ahas that we saw in the research that came out of the NAC study, is the opportunity to expand your pipeline. I saw this research and I immediately was like, oh my gosh, this is a really cool opportunity. We see agencies recruiting from all over the nation, and they're all trying to recruit one of the 7 personas. And I'm going to talk you through what each and every one of these are. But there's such a huge opportunity to create strategies to talk to each and every one of these individuals to grow your pipeline. And Shelley's son hit the nail on the head this morning when she was up here and she said, you know what, different caregivers want different things. And as an industry, we're primarily talking to one and only one of these groups. So I'm going to talk you through real quick here who these individual caregivers are. So as you think about expanding your pipeline, you can reach these folks. So career caregivers, this is the persona that every home care company wants to hire. They identify as a caregiver, or a CNA, or a home health aide. That's what they're searching for online. They have 3+ years of care experience. They're not working outside jobs because they don't want to. They want full-time hours in care. That's who they are. That's how they identify. They're proud to be a caregiver. They really care about client match. We have our caring on the siders. These are your middle-aged women. They're working multiple hourly jobs. Flexibility is king here. They get meaning and purpose from their jobs in care, but they make more money in their other jobs. And sometimes agencies, when I'm giving this presentation, will say, I just don't really want those caregivers. I just kind of want more of the career caregivers. But here's the thing. These caregivers can fill some really interesting holes in your schedule where the career caregivers might not be able to fill those holes. And this persona in particular is also off the charts and can be your biggest brand advocate. Then we had our young and on the moves, 18 to 24-year-olds, mix of students, working professionals. Does not mean they're in healthcare. These are our world changers. Don't quite know what they want to do. They want to change the world. Again, path might not be healthcare. They gravitate towards companies that have a mission and that are going to come alongside their next step. This group of people could get scared away if they feel like, oh, yeah, I just kind of want to be a caregiver today, but I don't want to be a caregiver 2 years from now. They're looking for organizations that are going to come alongside. Oodles of offspring, working moms, lots of kids. These guys struggling to make ends meet. They work in care because it's in their blood. It's who they are. It's what they do. They care at home, family first. They tend to be really, really good at their job because, again, it's in their blood. But flexibility is important for them because they have a lot of kiddos, and they're hungry for a better financial future. So this is a group that very much is looking for a pathway out of poverty. Very similar, but with less resources, are single move-in mamas. So flexibility here isn't a nice to have, it's a must have. They care less about the starting wage, but they care deeply about things like wage progression. Next 2 categories here on our getting on our older side are empty nesters, young female retirees, new retirees, like spending time with their grandkids. They want to get out of the house, help the community. What I thought was interesting about these 2 older groups, also limited low income. They don't really feel like they have to work, but they'd like to help someone in their community. Biggest turnover risk with this group, bad client match, not having the skills to deliver the care for a specific client in the home. Similar to our last group, but now a little bit older than our empty nesters, similar in terms of how they're motivated, similar in terms of their turnover risk. The study, I hopefully will have copies at my table soon. The shipment didn't arrive yet. Goes through all of these in detail in terms of what the biggest turnover risk is. But this group, what I found was fascinating, they're starting to have more money concerns. So they're a little bit worried that I might not have enough money to retire. So wage in this oldest group does start to play a factor as a benefit to working in care. So as you think about what to do with this data, the path to expanding your pipeline is targeting each group. This is something you can implement tomorrow. Again, most agencies, if you go look at like your job ads and your approach, they're talking to the career caregiver. People that identify as a caregiver, people that identify as a CNA, people that only want this as a career path. So look at your job ads, look at your recruitment messages, look at where you recruit. You know, all of these caregivers came from exactly the same community, but not all companies are attracting all of these different personas that are applying. So take a look and see who's actually applying and who isn't applying through these personas. Take a look at your benefits, how you talk about your benefits, how you engage these folks, how your pathways, and what the turnover risk is. You see there's 7 different personas, and what they want out of work is all different. So that career caregiver and your 2 older personas, their biggest turnover risk is a bad client match. That's why they're gonna leave. But do you know, like a caring on the sider, that's not the biggest turnover risk. The biggest turnover risk for them is they have to turn down hours at a higher paying job. They wanna stay in care, but if they have to change their schedule, they probably need to change it for their other job versus home care. So it's really understanding what the biggest turnover risk is and how to attract these different personas. Next one here is thinking about your KPIs from a recruitment and a retention perspective. And here's the reality, there's a huge divide. And I'm gonna talk about what I mean if you look at these 2 charts up here. So we asked providers, how many hires do you make from 50 job applicants? And you can see here, if we divide up the room in 4s, 31% of you are making 2 to 3 hires, 13% are making 1 or less, 22% of you are making 6 or more hires. Huge divide. That trickles down. How many callbacks do you get? If you call 10 job applicants about a job, how many call you back? This room is split in quarters. So some people in the room are getting 4 or more calls back. That's really good. But a third of the room is getting 1 or less callbacks. So there's a huge divide in home care, and internal operations are really important. And so often what we see is hires is the key metric. That's the KPI. So we ask executives a lot of questions about what are the KPIs. Here's the opportunity. You measure everything along the funnel up until a caregiver actually going and taking their first shift. Recruiters often end with, I got the paperwork, I got a hire, but how many of those drop off before they go take the shift? So really looking at what the KPIs are, what you're measuring, and also like who's accountable. You need one person accountable for each step in the process. Last but not least, employee engagement and retention is king, and there are hands down things that you can be doing now. Here's part of the struggle. So we ask providers, are your caregivers, are they fulfilled and engaged? 77% said yes. Here's where I think there's an opportunity. The market reality is our caregivers, they're struggling financially. If you ask a caregiver, I do a lot of focus groups. This is like what I do for fun. I'm a data geek. I sit down with caregivers. I ask them who their boss is. Who do they say? Scheduler. They're not connected to the company. They're not connected to who their manager is. They're connected to the scheduler. So if the scheduler doesn't have the hours they want and they're not connected to the company, they end up leaving. Huge opportunity. Caregivers, fundamentally, they're in this because they care for people. That is why they're here. They could make more money someplace else. They're here because they care for people. They're craving connection. So home care is an incredibly isolating role. So imagine, I shared those stats with you. I'm thinking about a caregiver. They're poor. They're more likely to struggle with anxiety and depression. They're isolated in the home, thinking the scheduler is their boss. They're craving connection. And here's the reason, from an ROI perspective, it makes sense to engage your team. Engaged caregivers, I'm gonna share a stat from one of our own businesses, are 400 to 600% less likely to turn over. Engaged caregivers call off less, they pick up more shifts, they drive more revenue, they also have more satisfied clients. Huge ROI. So in summary here, supported caregivers are the key to exceptional care. They're the key to longevity in their roles. As we think about solving the workforce crisis, workforce strategies need to be centered around the caregiver at the center, uplifting, empowering, and investing in caregivers, and that's going to accelerate change. All right, I will pass it back to the folks at Influence Group. Thank you for having me.